Welcome to Cultural Fugazi, an optimistic take on the culture of the end times. I am your host, Justice, and I'm joined, as always, with my co-host, Chris.
Hello.
And today we have a special fun episode for you. We didn't do shit.
Not even a little.
Not even a little. We said we'd do 2 episodes in February. We got excited at one point in time. We thought we'd have 3 episodes in the can somewhere. Ambitious us.
Hubris. Hubris brought us down, much like Icarus.
Yep, we have flown a little too close to the sun, I think. And so we're going to get 1 episode out here in March. Probably that's going to be it. So we figured we'd just kind of give you some updates on some stuff we've liked and enjoyed. So some books, movies, video games, some bands and some music that we like. And concert season's coming up soon, as some of you may have ever heard our first episode, which was just us getting drunk and talking about concerts. It's St. Patrick's Day, the day that we're recording this, so I've made some green beer for Chris and I to enjoy, and we're just going to talk through some bullshit. So let's get into, we just wrapped up a book club on Elric, and we've been reading some fantasy books. Chris, I know you don't just read fantasy.
That's true.
But I know you have been reading mostly just fantasy, I think, based on what you were telling me earlier. So
yeah, we've got a thing or two outside of that. It's funny at work we did an icebreaker recently as part of a team formation ceremony.
Oh man, you even said the word ceremony. That's how I know you're in project management.
Yeah.
If you're calling it a ceremony, no one else calls them ceremonies.
Yeah, it's great. It's super delightful that and it's one of those things where, you know, some of that corporate nonsense is like, most of it is nonsense, but some of it has like 25% of like, oh, this might actually make my work life slightly better. This falls into that category. But part of the 75% that is nonsense was learning how to use a Miro board, and doing that by doing this icebreaker where everybody on my team listed a thing about themselves, and then you had to drag a little T or an F onto the thing to say whether you thought that thing was true about the person or false about the person.
Ooh.
So mine was that in 2022 I read over 200 books.
And what was the primary response? Did they believe you or no?
It was split. It was split. Almost 50-50. I think it technically was like 45-65.
Did anyone thought you had read more than 200 and that's
55.
why it was false?
I don't think so. Everyone was like, How do you do that? It's like, well, get anxiety.
Yeah, be anxious.
Have a massive war break out in Europe, and decide that you're not going to engage in Twitter or Blue Sky at all. And there you go.
And well, in 2022, Blue Sky didn't exist.
No, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, and I think everyone gets the point.
Yes. So yes, getting to 200 books does not involve reading 200 fantasy books. There's definitely some other stuff that's...
Your loss.
I mean, to your point, you know, our fantasy book club we're approaching 80 as a group.
Yeah, we're rubbing right against it. I know.
Yeah.
It's a lot. I remember 50 like it was yesterday.
Yeah. Turns out there are a lot of fantasy books out there.
We barely read on 80, we still have not read Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
We still have not read the second Rothfuss book. We have not read. There's plenty of everything that we haven't read. I could tell you some things we have.
I mean, we talked about yesterday.
Friday.
On Friday, we talked about Conan. That's one that we really do need to dig into some other foundation. We've done a lot of like interesting takes on the genre that are outside of that, but not as much of the foundational stuff.
Right.
So, but that's fine. On the fantasy front, we'll talk about something in a little bit that I think you and I have both read. But outside of fantasy, I am currently in the middle of Middlemarch. So, you know, we're in the middle of March, reading Middlemarch.
I don't know what that is.
So George Eliot, which is the pen name of, I want to get her exact name and do her justice, Marianne Evans.
Okay.
So born like 1820, right around then. So dealing with very similar subjects to like your Oscar Wilde's, very heavily. Being halfway through this book, it is very clear to see the influence of Austen on her writing.
Okay.
It's not specifically like it's not only concerned with marriage and sort of like the social politics and politicking that you'll find in an Austen novel. It definitely goes outside and above and beyond some of that stuff in a way that is really fascinating, and the writing is really, really good. It's a beefy book, like 900 plus pages, but I can very much see already why it is labeled as a foundational piece of literature, and I can see why. I can already tell how it's influenced other like Oscar Wilde was probably heavily influenced by George Eliot.
So, like Jane Austen, George Eliot, what would you specifically call that outside of just like literature?
Yes.
Is there a term for this? Because I've always I've been adjacent to it, and I like things that are influenced by it as someone who loves. At some point in time, we should talk about romantasy and what the fuck romantasy is. We both read Fourth Wing recently, so we could talk about this.
That was the one I was thinking about, yeah.
Yeah, like just like the bullshit of that stuff plays lip service at best to some of what like Austen and George Eliot and then others in that space are doing. But like, what is that actually called? Do you know?
Well, so that very much does fall under the category of like literary fiction. And I think you also do get strong arguments suggesting that Austen is, you're perhaps the best example of like fiction romance. I think that there are certainly reasons to say that is true. I think some people who bristle against that are generally doing so because they have a dimmer opinion of romance, which I personally think is wrong
Foolish.
of them.
Yeah.
I think that
they must not like publishing companies.
Well, and I think that actually it's that conversation has been going on since at least Austen. And I think one of the interesting things with George Eliot is, she publishes under a pen name because she correctly assumes that her work will do better if people assume that it's written by a man. And she also, when she is writing, pushes back against some of what she calls, like, I think she was influenced by Austen, but I think she saw Austen as not doing enough serious writing. I think her argument would have been, don't just write about marriage and don't just write about the politics of manners. Like your writing should say more than that. And I don't think that's necessarily, I don't think that's accurate, but I do see where George Eliot is coming from. And it is clear to see the ways in which she kind of like does, her project is bigger than what Austen's project was as far as what her subject matter is and like how deep she's willing to go. So like George Eliot, I would not even remotely classify as romance. Like that is just literary fiction. That's it.
Yeah.
But I think Austen is where you get on that sort of like fence where you could hedge. Is this it's definitely literature? Is this romance? It's definitely romance. Yes.
Got it. Yeah, I didn't know if they were like, well, these are technically courtship fictions and yada yada. Like now that like romantasy as a term exists, that's why I was like, there has to be a genre term for this. This thing can't just exist in a nebula list of just we just call that literature.
Well, so the fun thing there is that now works that often do lean heavily on some of the kinds of trappings that you find in an Austen novel are your Regency romances. So they aren't going to strive to do some of the literary stuff that Austen did.
Bridgerton.
Yes,
yeah.
100% like Bridgerton. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the manners, comedy of manners, definitely like a lot of the like social positioning. Yeah, you're going to hear a lot about the ton and coming out balls and debuts and whatnot. And who's in an advantageous marriage and who's been ruined and whose fortunes have been just cast aside because they went and they threw their virtue away on some scalawag. Like that, you will get a lot of that in Regency romance, which does go back to that's Austen.
Well, shit. I just now had an entire like revelation as you were explaining this to me that all of Robin Hobb's The Live Ship stuff is her take on that.
Oh man! Look, if you hadn't sold me on it before, oh boy!
Oops! Well, it's all merchant families and like who's married to who, and like they're a colony of a greater empire, and it's old colony versus new money blood, and then but also there's dragons.
Yeah. So that does sound, and frankly, Eliot has a lot to say about that stuff too. I mean, Middlemarch, the entire beginning of the book has to do with sort of setting up a couple of different marriages.
Yeah.
And exploring, I would say, in a lot of ways, even more explicitly, some of the political dynamics behind why a woman would seek a marriage and why a man would seek a marriage to certain people, and what marriages are advantageous and why, and which ones aren't, and a lot about social standing. So,
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, shit. I'm reeling, and I'm like mentally just going like, well, fuck, I gotta read that now. at least some Austen, and then to go the one step past that with some of the other later stuff like Eliot. We'll see. But
highly recommend Austen. I think one of the great things about Austen is she's fun to read. She is highly readable. Her characters are delightful, and the prose is engaging. So it's good stuff.
I would probably do it based on what I know from the writing, I would probably do that as an audiobook and have a great time, is what I'm assuming.
I think that is absolutely accurate. Especially you get a good narrator on that, and you're going to have a good time. There's a reason that Austen novels have been made into movies repeatedly.
Yeah. Excellent. Great. I have not read anything that I would qualify as highbrow. But the last thing that I really stuck with, that I enjoyed, that was new, came out this year. So kind of the exact opposite of someone born in the 1800s. I just finished a book by a fantasy writer. He did a fantasy mystery that I really, really, really liked. This is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. So Robert Jackson Bennett did a trilogy that I liked. I think I wrapped that up last year, 2 years ago, Foundry Side.
Yes.
I had a good time with it. It was not what I would call good. I had a great time with it. So when I wrapped that up, I saw that he was putting out something new. He has done other things outside of fantasy, and I think he's done like horror before. So Foundry Side even had like a little bit of like body horror and some autonomy stuff that was interesting. This is like straight up Leviathans are coming on to like the shore. They're like a symbol for, natural disasters, and some of them are partially, is this man-made's fault, but also like they have giant human heads on them. Like it's cool as shit.
I love a good Leviathan.
Yeah, and it's a fun murder mystery. So you're trying to figure out, once you learn the rules of how this magic system and what's kind of possible and not possible plays out, he gets to set up a fun little murder mystery of like, hey, this guy died, and one, how, we kind of know the how, but two, who and why, and kind of figure out from there exactly what happened and how this has been repeating and who's hiding it and whatever in this specific imperial fascist society. And why these things keep getting covered up and what that means to like humanity as a whole. And it's fun. It's breezy. It's very easy to get through. Especially not as I did a not audiobook for that one, because I actually got an ARC copy from the publisher, and it was fun. Like it was goofy fun. One of the characters is like, in Foundry Side, Robert Jackson Bennett didn't really get to use fuck a lot because it was not real. It wasn't like not for children, but it was kind of that borderline. Young, I don't know what that's called when it's not young adult, but it's written with the same kind of outlook as a young adult novel, which sounds like an adult novel, but it's not an adult novel. Like it's just kind of this weird borderline thing where, so it's kind of like that, where this one is very much like, hey, we're going to use good language. And by good language, I mean the word fuck a lot. And I really enjoyed that. It was very short, like 250, 300 pages maybe.
Okay.
Easy to get through, highly enjoyable, fun little mystery. Great time. And there's not enough, we were just talking about this in the book club, not a lot of fantasy mysteries.
Yeah, certainly we, despite having, churned through almost 80 books, we've gotten one good one.
Which one would you even call that?
Gideon.
Oh yeah, Gideon. Yeah, Gideon
Yeah.
the Ninth is. But is that fantasy? That's the fun thing. Well, technically, that might be that's science fantasy,
Right.
maybe, but with a
Yeah.
So that one's fun because is it fantasy? But yeah, it is. Catch me outside if you don't think so.
Exactly. Yes.
But yes. Yes, we've done that one. We've done some stuff that's adjacent,
Yes.
like some of the horror, the Halloween stuff that we always pick. Some of that stuff has been close to mystery.
Yeah, there have been some books that have mystery elements to them, but the primary focus is not let us solve this. There's a mystery box. Can you figure out what's going? Like it's usually tangential.
Yeah. Like, oh, there's also dragons here. Or oops.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like what happened to the dragons? Like, well, who knows? But that's not the plot.
Yeah, but also that's not the plot.
Yeah.
We have to figure out if these people are going to kiss or not.
Exactly. Exactly.
And the answer is usually yes.
Steerswoman was definitely one of those where like she was trying to do a thing and there was the mystery happening, like what's going on with like these weird technology stuff, which is probably another one like Gideon, where if you read more, you'll find out actually a spaceship. That was a satellite, probably.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what we've gotten, and that wasn't the primary focus of that story. She was doing something else, and that happened to also be there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The only other one I can really think of is the one monster one, but was mostly about will these boys kiss or not?
Yeah.
Or they were kissing, and it was challenging. Like the whole thing was their relationship was bad, and that was the book, and it was great. We didn't like it, but I can't remember as our consensus was not good.
I don't remember, honestly.
I don't remember.
Because that was one that was definitely on the borderline, because I think
because it was trash.
She did the thing that she meant to do, but she could have done it better.
Yeah,
and there were things that we were like, it would have been better if it was like this.
And it wasn't the primary thing wasn't the plot that was the bad thing. It was just kind of everything else around it was just not well done. I'll find the name of that book.
The Monster of Ellenhaven.
Yeah, that's it. I couldn't remember the word Ellenhaven.
Yeah.
That was the one that I was like, I knew it was the monster of something.
Yep.
And then we both recently have gotten through a bunch of Le Guin again.
Yeah.
Turns out if there's one constant that you can come to us for, it's usually thinking about Le Guin, actively reading Le Guin, or, just generally talking about Le Guin.
Yeah. So I know, Justice, you and I are both listening to the Shelved by Genre podcast that initially started off. It's a podcast that's going to do something like what the title says. They're going through staples of genre fiction and kind of critiquing it and really digging into them, looking at it through a very fine critical eye, adding some like context, doing a lot of what we do in our book club, but
as a podcast.
Yeah. Which
is never a thing we will do.
No.
Absolutely not. No way.
Right.
That's for us.
Yes, exactly. But they started with another book that we did very early on, a pick that you had, Justice, Shadow of the Torturer. They did that whole series, which is the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. So I listened through part of that. I still have some Gene Wolfe to get through before I can finish that.
Because Gene Wolfe is a lot.
Yes, Gene Wolfe is a lot.
Yeah.
Then they moved on to Le Guin as their next stop. And so they've been working through Earthsea. And so at this point, they've gotten through Wizard of Earthsea, Tombs of Atuan, The Furthest Shore, and they just released an episode on Tehanu. So at this point, it's like, hey, this is a great excuse to reread. So you and I have both read A Wizard of Earthsea many, many times.
I think I'm at 5.
Yeah, I think I'm at 4 now.
Yeah, like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we have, I've reread Tombs.
I'm about to reread Tombs. I got a trip coming up, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I had never read Tombs or The Furthest Shore before. You and I both read them last year.
Yes.
And so rereading them again is part of the sort of the podcast stuff. And I just, for the first time, read Tehanu. Finished it yesterday.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, Le Guin's real good.
I don't know how many times I would have to consistently restate one thing that our book club has really showed us is how fucking good Le Guin is. Of like, no matter what we're doing, we can point back to Le Guin and go, man, fucking A Wizard of Earthsea, Tombs of Atuan, which we have not read as a book club, but like Tombs of Atuan, we can go back and point to that stuff and be like, fuck, Le Guin's real good.
Yeah, and I was telling you just as before we recorded, Tahanu really recontextualizes Tombs of Atuan in particular. It's fascinating because Le Guin was in one place when she wrote Tombs, as far as like thinking about how women function in the world and what's, you know, a feminist response to that. And then Tahanu comes from a place of, well, now it's been over a decade since I wrote that, and time has passed, things have changed. I've had some time to think about these concepts. Where am I now? And that shines through in a really, really fascinating way. And for me, makes Tombs even better than I thought it was originally. Like, it's a very fascinating companion piece when you have Tahanu to sort of push against it. And also really recontextualizes our main wizard boy, Ged, in a really, really interesting way.
I will say, when I read Tombs of Atuan the first time, I gave it a 4-star review on Goodreads. I kind of came off of it not unhappy, but the specific story that she tells in Tombs of Atuan kind of left me wanting, mostly because like that's the first time you see how she's going to tell the rest of the Earthsea books, which is Ged's here, maybe, sometimes. But really, this story is about the world. So it's through another point of view character, which when I did The Farthest Shore that first time through, that wasn't as challenging because Tombs of Atuan kind of sets you up to be like, oh, hey, the expectations are this. But the primary point of view character for Tombs of Atuan, again, because she's telling a very specific story about how women work in the world,
yes,
and a lot of this stuff, I didn't connect with it as a man. Who knew? But not only that, it wasn't just like, well, I mean, this is about a girl, so fuck it. That's not what I mean. But it just, the specific way she tells the story, she gets into a lot of the world that I like, which is these elder shadow, the world before Earthsea, and all these old gods and the stuff that I really, really like. And she's like, and they're there, and just kind of moves on from them. And I was like, no, we should go back to that. But and she doesn't, which is fine, or at least she doesn't in anything that I've read so far, because that's not really the point of the story.
Right.
It's just beautiful, delicious set dressing that you could chew through all day.
Right.
So that was why I think that was part of it. When I look back at what my initial reaction was, I wasn't as floored with it the first time through as I was Earthsea. I think I have read it. No, I think I did it just the once, because I think I did it. I reread Earthsea again, Tombs, and then The Farthest Shore. And The Farthest Shore, I really fucking like The Farthest Shore. I really, really, really like The Farthest Shore, because I the thing that I really love that Le Guin is great at, and Earthsea specifically, and The Farthest Shore gets into it in more detail, but she does it kind of everywhere. She does it in Tombs of Atuan a lot. But specifically her thoughts on death, and like how she deals with death and like time and you know what it means to leave a mark in the world, or is it even worth to leave a mark in the world, and destiny and fate and all this shit. And The Farthest Shore really, really, really works for me for specifically what she says at the end of that book, and kind of everything between the relationship between Ged and Aaron.
Aaron,
Aaron, the boy prince.
Or his true name, Lebanon.
Yeah. And I just really like what she has to say about their relationship and who they are as people, and a lot of that. That Tombs is very internally reflective, right? We only really get I cannot remember the girl's name.
Aha or Tanar.
Yes, that's why, because it was Aha.
Yeah.
And that's why I was like, I can't remember this. But yeah, specifically, it's a lot of self-reflection and self-discovery with her. Specifically, she bounces off of a couple characters, but never really like has that motivating force that I like, which is a little bit of like characters rubbing up against other characters. She eventually rubs up against, hey, our wizard boy Ged. But that part didn't do it for me that first time through, quite like it did with Aaron and Ged, or Ged and Earthsea, right? Like, so those things. So I'm excited to get back through it. And now that I know that it's kind of like required reading to do the next thing, because with her stuff, they're all so short.
Yes.
There's no reason not to reread the whole thing if you're going to read a new one if it's been a while.
Yes. Well, and I will say that, so the Shelf by Genre podcast is going to go through all of Earthsea, so I know that is absolutely on my agenda, and it sounds like on your agenda as well. I for our Bookmas this year, I got us all a big old book of Le Guin short stories that are not the Earthsea short stories. Right. So a lot of, I think you get mostly her sci-fi stuff in that, which is also really, really good. And I think I am motivated to go revisit some of that too. It's been a really, really long time since I've read The Left Hand of Darkness, which was my favorite Le Guin, and now that I have reread Wizard of Earthsea and now have more of Earthsea under my belt, I'd like to see if that still holds true. I have a hunch that it will, but like, it's been a while. So I'm like, hey, remind me what it is about this book that I loved. And I'd like to do more of, like, The Dispossessed is fantastic. I want to do more of the Heinous Cycle, because I also haven't read all of those.
Yeah. I don't go look for the audiobook of The Left Hand of Darkness from the library. Because I haven't had any problems renewing it lately, because it is actively in my Libby. So stay the fuck away for a little bit. Let me get through this trip, and then it's all yours.
Sure. It's good. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. This podcast that they're talking about, like, the history of Le Guin and kind of like where Le Guin was at and what she was doing and what she was thinking through some of her post work and some of the other work she was completing around the same time and whatever. And I was like, fuck, I really need to go back and read that. So that is also on my list. So stay away.
That brings up something that will come back up later on in the podcast when we get to other stuff, but I do want to touch on it here because this is a great spot for it, because I think Le Guin is a very interesting case that sort of I think disproves the method of criticism that this falls under. You'll get to a point in the Shelf by Genre podcast where they start to talk about new criticism. And new criticism, I don't think they talk about this specifically on the podcast, but Justice, are you familiar with the concept of death of the author?
As a concept, or like the actual definition? Concept, yeah. Mm-hmm. Actual textbook definition, no.
Well, concept, you're probably pretty much there. So death of the author comes out of this new criticism style of relating to books, where the idea is that everything that you should need to be able to understand a book is within the pages of the book. So you don't need no other context. The book itself is the key to everything in the book. You don't need anything but the book. So death of the author is a way of saying you don't need to know anything about the author. The author is dead. The author does not exist. The author is not a thing. You don't need to know their gender. You don't need to know the time period they were writing in. You don't need to know the political or economic forces that were shaping the world when they were doing their writing. You don't need to know the personal circumstances that might have been impacting their mindset. None of that is important. You have everything you need in the book. So, it's great. Our listeners can't see this, but Justice, you're having a lot of reactions to the words I'm saying.
My eyes are very wide.
Yeah. Would you like to share some of your thoughts about that?
We can move on to the rest of your point, but hooey, that is not. It's just not how I think. It's so far removed from how I think that. I mean, there's literally a book that we read. Kicking off book club whenever we did the Trader Baru Cormorant.
Yeah.
It's like, here's this book about nice lesbians, and then here's the guy who wrote it. It's about, like, what was it, like semi-Asian culture, yes, and like these sexual repression and also a little bit of the Roman Empire, and then it's this fucking guy from Utah, or something, and I'm just like, It made me, and I can understand why some people really, really like it, because maybe looking at it from a perspective that it doesn't matter who wrote it, it's not bad. except none of us liked it.
Yes.
And that didn't help.
Yeah. Yes. So I think talking about, you mentioned some things about Le Guin, and one of the things I do love about Le Guin is that unlike some other authors, and I think this is also a thing that is true about Stephen King, who the Shelved by Genre folks have another podcast that they do called King Things, or just King Things, that goes through all of Stephen King's works. He will talk about what he was thinking, what his intentions were in a way that is very interesting and can provide a lot of interesting context around some of the books that he's written. And Le Guin is very happy to talk about, like one of the things that she'll say about a book like Tombs of Atuan is like you will get in the giant volume that you can get now, the beautiful illustrated copy of her collected Earthsea works. You'll get bits at the end that are just, here's what she said about this. And so like Tombs, she'll literally say, hey, I was in a very pessimistic place about feminism at the time that I wrote this book. I had these specific feelings, and this is what I was trying to deal with. And like, I don't know that I would have written this now, but I needed to write it then for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I think that's fascinating context to have, and really does make the work more interesting and more full. And I think there's plenty that you can get from the work by just looking at the work itself. But man, you can get so much more if you pull in that additional context. So I think it's interesting to think about the concept of death of the author and go, well, but look what you're missing, though. Look what you don't get to engage with when you pretend the author does not exist when attempting to look at why this work was written or what this work was written about.
I mean, the whole point of our podcast is things in context, right? That's the entire point of the fucking... Because you and I love context. It's the thing that, like, it's why we were, part of this idea started from us just pairing movies together, right? Because the context of a movie paired with another movie makes those two movies interesting. Not that they are not interesting on their own, but the thing that you and I like is the thing of this movie with this movie because of this reason, or this thing is relevant to the conversation of this object. They have shared thoughts in paths, and that part makes our brain go brr, right?
Right.
Is whenever like, hey, these two things have a connection.
Yes.
And that's the fun thing, not the here's an object in a vacuum.
Yes.
We have found the monolith in space.
Yes.
And we are going to examine the monolith in space as a monolith in space, regardless of the fact that what the fuck is the monolith?
Right.
So like...
But like if you got like a radio frequency that was like from the monolith builders, and they're like, hey, we wanted it to do at least this one partial thing, you'd be like, you know what? I would like to talk about that.
I mean, I'm like, I specifically saw the movie 2021 on TV. So like the second part of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Arthur C. Clarke wrote more books after the movie had come out. And the other books are fine. They're not great, but they're fine. But specifically, like the whole point is that you don't know what the builders of the monolith had really intended to do potentially. And that's what I mean, right? Like, but even the perspective that Kubrick finds fascinating is, Dave the astronaut and his relationship with these objects. That that even by removing the author from the equation, you're still in the equation.
Yes.
So is it also but it can't be the death of you also as a critic. But I could see why maybe trying to remove the author may make that a little bit easier to understand. If I'm like, well, there's two people having a conversation with this book, so let's take one of them out.
Yeah. Well,
it makes the formula simpler.
Yes. Well, and I think that is like, I think tools from, and Shelved by Genre goes into a very similar discussion. And like when they said this, I'm like, yes, Shelved by Genre, you are reinforcing the opinions that I have about this. But I think there are a lot of really useful tools that it provides you, because I think being able to do, like, a lot of this also does come from the deconstructivist bent that you get from like your Foucault's and your, postmodern and post-structural folks. So like a lot of that is, hey, we're going to give you the tools to like really pull apart what this means and like figure out like some of this is going to be subjective, and that subjectivity can be found within the work itself. So you can kind of like figure out what the work is trying to say by looking to what the work is saying. So like some of those tools are useful and good. Like being able to look at a work and say like on its, and we kind of do something similar in book club, like what was the point of this work? And we do include the author, like what was the author trying to do? But like what's the work trying to do? What is the work attempting to say? And just like viewing it from that perspective, there are a bunch of tools that are useful and interesting to give you a lot of fodder to think about and discuss. But then also like, hey, was McCarthyism happening at the same time? So like, was the author trying to make a point about like the freedom of art and expression, like in the face of, authoritarian like power grabs and pans against free speech? Like that's also interesting context that can give you a lot of like, really useful stuff to chew on. So like, I think death of the author is not a useful absolute in my opinion. It's very much no, there's a way to look at it that doesn't involve pulling the author in completely, but if you totally cast the author out, then I think you're missing exactly what we've been talking about here. Useful and relevant and interesting context.
Yeah, I couldn't even, I can't even, it's so far removed from how I think of things. So maybe there are some tools there. Maybe I should look at that and do some of maybe my own personal reading through that lens, just to see like, hey, it doesn't matter I'll cover the name of the author up it's just me and the title of the book. I mean, even the books that we have read sometimes specifically deal with the fact that the book is a retranslation.
Yes.
And your relationship with the author is like the whole thing.
Yes.
Right. Because the author is a fake, translation as a tool is influence.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
yes.
Like you and I both did that version of Beowulf.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The retranslation of just,
which no matter what, you're already starting with the translation, which like I think translation in and of itself is fascinating. But yeah, like how much can you divorce the author from the subject when there are multiple authors, and the way that one of those authors decides to interact with the text could literally monumentally change the meaning of. So
yep. Whenever you're ready to talk about the video game part of the thing, the video game I'm playing had a whole thing about the translation stuff. So that came up with.
Oh, cool. The one I played is a whole thing about an author actually dying. So
yeah.
So when I was in college, one of the things that we did that was one of the best and most interesting things that I did in college period, we had two different translations of the complete works of Plato, like the two gold standard complete works of Plato. And our professor said, hey, if you go to this dialogue and look at this sentence in this edition, you'll see the sentence is there. In this edition, the sentence is missing. Does that matter? That's the prompt. That's it. And like, it was like you said, with the brain going brr, like I looked at that and went, holy crap, this totally and completely changes the meaning of this argument. Like it's a totally different argument without this sentence. And that was an authorial decision on the translator's part. Why did the translator do that? The translator had reasons, and understanding that context might give you some sense of like, is this because this author has like a ideological agenda? And so leaving this sentence out actually allows them to bolster that agenda. Was it a mistake? Like all that stuff is interesting context and fodder. And
I mean, people have died for this.
Yes.
Right? Like
yes.
In religious context, like this is a life and death decision for years and years and years and years and years, as long as we've had religion. Like
yes,
we have murdered people for this. So
language.
Yeah. Jesus. Well, not Jesus, language, but Jesus.
Also murdered people for that.
Yeah,
so,
also murdered people for that. You want to take a quick little break and then we'll come back with maybe some movies and TV shows?
Yeah, it sounds like a plan.
And we're back with more Cultural Fugazi. we're gonna move on from books because we could talk about that for another hour and a half.
It's true. Turns out we really like books.
Yeah, we didn't even we talked off mic about the Sarah Moss stuff.
Yeah.
So you guys
Hey,
don't get that, but
maybe someday.
Maybe someday.
I'm gonna be reading some of that this year, so it might come up.
what did you? Fuck it, we're gonna talk more about books. We didn't talk about Fourth Wing.
We didn't talk about Fourth Wing. Oh my God. Yeah.
So you read Fourth Wing
Yes.
for a book club. Also, really quick, movies and TVs. I rewatched Dune. We'll talk about Dune. I think we'll do an episode on Dune.
Yes.
Is what we're thinking.
Yeah, I plan to rewatch soon.
Yeah.
As well. So.
We're both watching Shogun.
Yes, I just started yesterday.
So we'll circle back to that.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you finished that.
I have 2 episodes to go.
You have 2 episodes. Okay.
Yes.
I only watched the first one, but
Yeah. So yeah,
I like it.
yeah, it's fun. It is definitely, and this has been said to death, but it's doing a very different thing from the movie. The movie, I saw somebody, and I don't remember who, so I'm sorry, person that I do not know specifically who to credit this to, but somebody pointing out that the movie is definitely sexy, whereas the show is intimate.
Right.
It's like, yes. 100%.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Accurate.
That's all we need to say about that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not far enough in it. So yeah, Fourth Wing. You read Fourth Wing. I also read Fourth Wing a while ago.
Yes.
I have not yet read the second book.
Neither have I.
It is in my Libby. I've been punting on it, so I have access to it. I've been punting on it because I want to read the new Sarah Moss. What did you think of Fourth Wing? Because I'll tell you what I thought of Fourth Wing. But what did you think of Fourth Wing? And then also, how did your book club? Your book club's a little bit different than our book club because you're in a more public-y, what some people would call a normal book club, unlike the 3 of us drinking beers as a dinner club where we also discuss books every 2 weeks.
So that would be a case where I say, hey, those people are prescriptivists and they're wrong. Because I think prescriptivists are almost always wrong.
Yes.
But yes.
Right. Yeah.
That book club does have a larger audience than just 3 good friends who already have a lot of common touchstones and similar interests discussing books. Yeah. Although we have enough differing backgrounds and opinions that
doesn't always. Yeah.
Yeah. Our conversations are very interesting in good ways. It is, though, fun and interesting to get all of those different perspectives, because there are some people in that book club that are also authors. There are some people in that book club who are more casual readers. You do get a bit more of a broad swath of opinions. So it's a good way to kind of have a gut check on like, oh, wait, that's right. Not everybody does think the same way about these things or these books that I do. And it's like it's a very like left-leaning book club, for better or for worse. So like that, they're not going to be like espousing weird right-wing conspiracies when they're talking about books, but like, you know.
I mean, not yet.
Yeah, it's true.
Not with that attitude.
Right. So I thought that the first half of Fourth Wing was a pretty inoffensive going to deadly magic school book.
You're a dragon rider, Harry.
Yes. That it made total sense to me why it was very popular. It's written in a very accessible way. And in a way that somebody in my other book club did point out that like, hey, the language being used here isn't like your stereotypical fantasy language. They're using our slang. They're using like for the win, like that comes up in the book. So like that means that some of this other, fantasy set dressing is probably a little easier for folks to digest who haven't read 80 books with 2 of their friends and talked about them for many weeks.
I mean, just think about how much influence Elric
yes.
has on Fourth Wing.
Yes.
Yes. When you think of The Hobbit, you also think Fourth Wing.
Right? Oh, always, every time. So I thought that the first half was that. And then...
Which we do have, you and I have some touchstones for books like that. Because
yes.
you and I both have not read, or at least I have not read, Katniss. What's the fucking
the Hunger Games?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've read all of those.
I've never read the Hunger Games.
Oh, I did. No, this definitely also there is a way in which one of our recent book club picks, I think, falls under this sort of like the Hunger Gamesification of fantasy and sci-fi, where there's a kind of voice that you get and a kind of construction of the books that like seems very much like it's attempting to ride that wave. And Fourth Wing definitely falls under that category, which is not to say that it's bad necessarily. Like that worked. It sold a lot of books.
I mean, Gideon the Ninth works because of the way that Gideon talks. Right? Like Gideon the Ninth as a book and sells you on these characters because Gideon is a normal ass human in a world full of necromancers.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like that's what works there.
Yes.
So there's obviously something to that, right?
Yes.
And it makes that stuff very approachable, very relatable,
yes,
and very fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like Fourth Wing is doing a version of that for the first half. Then the next quarter of the book is a really, 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 really shitty romance story.
And it's bad.
It's bad.
It's really bad.
It's very bad.
And this is someone who likes that bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I will give a lot of leeway and grace because I read a bunch of dumb books about dukes that like
you like Bridgerton a lot.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yes.
like we'll say that. We'll
yes.
put it that way.
Perfect.
Right?
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think True Blood is one of the best shows that was ever on television. And I hated watching half of it.
Yes.
So yeah, we're not geniuses. We're not rocket doctors here.
So all of which to say that like we have a lot of capacity and space in our hearts for middling to bad.
Yeah, to bad
romance.
Yeah.
This did not meet that threshold. And then the last quarter was a weird, shitty diplomacy thing where it's like, now we're setting the stage for war and intrigue and things. It's like, no, you should have picked one of these lanes and stuck with it. And you didn't. And now the last half of this book is just really frustrating in a way that it didn't have to be.
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty accurate assessment. But I came away with it a little bit different. The part that I liked the least was actually the murder school. And I think I liked it the least because I am so fucking tired of murder school. I'm exhausted with murder school. And we just read another murder school for book club.
We did.
The Will of the Many. We've both read Scholomance, which I think is
good murder school.
Good
book.
murder school.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just what else did I read? There's just so much of it. Everything's murder school, and I get it, right? And then there's college murder school.
Yeah.
Right. So you have
Lee Bardugo's
Lee
new stuff,
Bardugo
right?
and the Legendborn, which is more the young adult.
Oh, sure.
Murder College, and like Murder College is a thing that's been around for a while. What is it? All the Skull and Bones stuff and whatever is whatever, you know. But I'm so fucking tired of murder school. I was like, can we just get done with the murder school part? Just get to the fucking. And she's a romance novel writer by trade, and that's a polite way of saying she writes smut for a living.
Yeah.
But she writes a very specific type of smut, and it is very political smut.
Yeah. She is a army or marine. She's a military wife.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
There isn't. Hey, I'm related to multiple people who have been military wives.
Yeah.
So they're not bad people.
They're not bad people, right? She writes a very specific type of military romance fantasy that kind of doesn't always play out. It ends up with some political undertones to it. It's not just, hey, big Marine guy comes home from the army, let's fuck him, right? Like, it's not just that.
Right.
There's always some other things and some set dressing that people have started to point at. I have not read any of her other romance stuff.
I haven't either.
But Fourth Wing really seemed like her throwing spaghetti at the wall to say, how do I sell more books?
Yeah.
And she did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She won.
She won. She added murder school,
Yes.
turned the military part really fucking weird,
Yeah.
and then added everything that Naomi Novik has done better, which is dragon riding, military politics, but military politics of dragon riding, which Novak did with
Well, and also class politics.
And class politics.
Which, man, Scholomance does
Yep.
infinitely better.
I'm just getting back to Novak wrote that entire book series about what if dragons were boats.
Yeah. yeah.
You know,
yeah.
in the Napoleonic Wars. So
Yes.
that stuff is very good. So she piggybacked.
Well, and someone mentioned that there's also some dragon sex, and Anne McCaffrey did that way better.
Oh yeah.
So also that.
Yep. So Anne McCaffrey did that.
Yeah. Right.
There's something to. We talked about this, right, in book club at one point in time. At some point in time, people wanted to fuck the dragons,
Yeah.
right? And,
Thank you, Barbara Hambly.
Yeah, and Barbara Hambly. That's exactly. Barbara Hambly wanted to fuck a dragon.
And she was right
And
for it.
she was right. You know, she did it. She wrote a book where she's like, she's going to fuck a dragon, and it's going to be cool. And it was cool.
Yeah.
Whatever.
That book is Dragon's Bane, by the way, if you'd like to.
Yeah, if you'd like to read some Barbara Hambly, it's fun.
It's a good book.
It's a
really
delight.
good book, yeah.
Yeah, so we've moved on from wanting to fuck a dragon because that's weird and gross, apparently. I don't know. Wells also did the gargoyle, or the gargoyle.
The Rakshasas.
Yeah.
The Cloud Roads series.
Yeah,
Yep.
So some of that's them fucking too.
Yeah.
So, Fourth Wing is this, well, the dragons are the dragons. The people are the people. They're mentally linked. So whenever the dragons fuck, it makes the people horny. And sure, whatever.
Yeah.
That
sounds like a setup that, okay, what are we doing with this?
Yeah.
And then we don't do anything interesting with it.
It's just to make the relationship with sad boy and angsty girl progress faster.
God, he's not even a good sad boy.
And he's not even a good sad boy.
It's too much of he's a jock, but he's also an emo, and he's also the loner. It's like he can't be all of those things.
But he gets to be all of those things against the paladin, right? The goody two shoes, follow the rules, whatever. So even the
you mean Zane, who kind of mind rapes her? That guy?
Yeah, the guy who kind of mind rapes her. So I ended up, I think, liking this book a lot more than you did, but I just didn't think about any of it.
I didn't dislike it.
I think I gave it a 4-star review.
Okay, yeah, you did like it. You did like it more than I did.
I liked it a lot more than you because it is butter, right? It is the smoothest. There's nothing to it.
I will say to that exact point, the more I think about the book, the less I like it. So right after I was done reading it, I was like, I think I might have even said this to you, it was a silly book, but it wasn't as silly as I was expecting it to be. And it wasn't a bad kind of silly. And that was my immediate reaction to it. And then the further removed I get and the more time I have to think about it, the more I'm like, wait, no, what? No,
it's not good. And the thing that I would challenge myself to go back and really think about it is that not only was it not good, but as far as is it serviceable for what I'm trying to read a book like that for, at the time I would tell you yes. As soon as I finished it, I would tell you yes, it is serviceable for what I'm coming to that book for, which is barely anything.
Right.
It is something to do, so I'm not spending time with myself, right? And is it one of those? Yeah, it's one of those. So reading it by myself in a vacuum, not really thinking about it, harmless until you go back and think about any of it.
Literally anything at all.
Any of it. So I am excited to actually read book 2.
Well, I do think it is very much the kind of thing where I understand why a lot of people, my sister, one of my sisters is reading it. A couple of my nieces are reading it. I understand why they are reading it and why it is popular. That does not surprise me. And so I think there is a part of me that's hey, there's a lot about this book that is not good. But also, again, we talk a lot about did she accomplish the thing that she set out to do? And I think if you're going to judge the book on those merits, then she knocked that out of the park.
Yeah, it's very successful, not just from
easy. despite the fact that I didn't necessarily like love the thing, I burned through it like that. It's very easy to read.
Yeah, it is a snack food. It is a bag of chips. Like there's nothing there. And I thought there was nothing there in a good way. And that's what separated that from a 4 to a 3. Because I've read plenty of there's nothing there in it, and I've given 3-star reviews on Goodreads instead of 4 for some of that stuff. But this one, her use of language is so inoffensive, like so inoffensive to digest. Right? There's no friction. That's why I meant like it's like butter. Right? There's nothing there.
I think there's no friction as long as you don't pay too much attention.
As long as you don't,
you're right. Like
as long as you don't look through like sheets,
it
right?
looks nice from afar. Don't get too close.
Yep.
If you get too close, you're gonna see those cracks.
Yeah. Don't look at what's in the sentence.
Some of this
Just
is a
look
little
at the
dirtier
sentence
than it should be. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I didn't hate it, and then I would even go so far as to say I liked it. I will carry that burden with me.
Well, I didn't hate it, but I'm not going so far as to say I liked it.
It's not as bad as the Atlas 6, which Amazon bought to turn into a TV show.
Yeah, I didn't even bother reading that.
Oh my god,
especially
that
when
thing was so fucking
when you
terrible.
Described, you're like, I'm hate reading the second.
I was
book.
gonna hate read it. I still haven't convinced myself to do it because I'm gonna do it, but I still haven't convinced myself to do it. There's so many other better books to read. And it's not just me with that one either. I don't know what Amazon thought whenever they picked that thing up because the reviews for it are all over the place. But that's another murder school-ish, but it's not a school. It's something else, but it's another murder thing.
Right.
And I think that's where the audience for that stuff is obviously still out there. Mm-hmm. It's still Hunger Games kind of brought a lot of that stuff to how do we make the battle royale experience tolerable, which she's always said, I didn't even read battle royale or whatever. Fuck you. Like, even if you didn't know you were influenced by it, you were. Mm-hmm. It's literally the same thing. But even with like how prevalent that stuff is with games like Fortnite, like it's not going away.
No.
But how do you write something and do something with that? And that's why I think whenever we read Scholomance, that book at least had something to say about murder school while doing another murder school.
Yeah, it was one of the fascinating things and I was really curious about this. One of the fascinating things about the other book club I'm in was I was interested to see if there was anybody who had an easier time with Fourth Wing than they did with Scholomance. Because there were one or two people who said I couldn't do Scholomance because the main character was too grating.
Yeah,
like she was too much for me.
Yeah, she's angsty. She's mean.
She's a teenage girl.
Yeah, she's a teenage girl. She's like, not only is she a teenage girl, but she's a goth teenage girl.
Yes, which like to me like part of my curiosity was, hey, she's also a teenage girl of color. So like part of my curiosity there was like, what is the point of friction here? Like, what is it that you are actually like bouncing off of? And with Fourth Wing, you have another teenage girl, and I don't find her as compelling a teenage girl as our main character in Scholomance, but you have another teenage girl who is kind of angsty. She's kind of good at everything, even though she shouldn't be, which is frustrating, but whatever, it's fine.
She has what her situation with her mother, puts her in this thing to force her to excel because she's not going to let her daughter be a
It's like either you will be in the war school and not a bookish scribe because I am a general and that's what our family does, or you'll die, and either way, better for me.
Right.
Yeah. It did turn out that some of the folks who had problems with Scholomance had less problems with Fourth Wing, which I thought was very interesting, and it seems to me like that might actually be more of a cultural thing than it is a like.
To give people the benefit of the doubt, I don't think every Naomi Novik book is written perfectly either. There's plenty of... She had that phase of redoing the fantasy stuff or redoing fairy tales and whatever that I really did not like. And some of that was from her perspective of how she would treat characters and how she was writing these characters. And that was more of like a prose dynamic thing that I was not a major fan of than it was the characters. So to give a benefit of a doubt, Naomi Novak is not a perfect writer.
Yep.
So I could understand that her ability to convey this angsty teen, which she does really well.
Yes.
Now, let me say, to remove the benefit of the doubt, she does that fucking really good in Scholomance.
Yeah.
So I could see why someone could potentially have that friction
Mm-hmm.
if we remove the cultural aspects and say, no, they're just bad at reading books, which is what I'm not trying to say.
Yes.
But I am saying they're just bad at reading books.
So then my next like curiosity would be, let's give them, we talk about Shinji a lot in our book club, let's give them a Shinji character, let's give them a male protagonist who is annoying and a teenage boy, and see how that goes, and like what's the response there. Because as you know, Justice, I have a lot of space in my heart for Shinjis. I also have a lot of space in my heart for very angsty teenage girls. Like they're
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, your heart's big enough for two.
It is. Like, hey, we all, well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us had a bad time in high school. Yeah. And I am here to embrace all of the people who have also had a bad time in high school.
Right. And you would think from a book club, like if you're an adult ass, man, woman, whatever, and in a book club in the year of our Lord 2024, you probably also had a bad time in high school.
There are a couple of people in the book club who have specifically said they didn't. I'm like, I have questions.
And you're here now?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
This is how you're choosing to spend your time?
Right. Yeah.
I would question that.
Yeah. So like I do think that for me that is one of the things that I was kind of aware of with Fourth Wing, and one of the things that I do think is worth thinking about and like kind of making explicit is it's very easy, I think, for a lot of people to write off teenage girls and fantasy and books that are about teenage girls, and to say things like this is like obnoxious, or this isn't well, or whatever. And like I think I want to be very careful not to do that with Fourth Wing, because of that.
It's bad for different reasons.
Yes, it's bad for different reasons.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to give the book credit when it deserves credit, in that like it is very accessible for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So a couple of folks on the other book club are librarians, and they have pointed out that this is sort of like the Twilight phenomenon, where Twilight isn't necessarily the best book series in the world, but when you have somebody who's interested in Twilight who comes into the library and goes, hey, can I get the next Twilight book? And you go, well, actually, that's on hold right now, so you can't get it anytime soon, but can I interest you in this? And then so you give somebody who's reading Fourth Wing Scholomance, and you go, hey, you can't get this right now, but what if you read this other series? So it's still like an entry point to getting people interested in reading, and it is still doing it's not bad enough for me to be like, this is an abomination. It's like, no, it's fine. And my frustrations have more to do with the things that I like in books than they have to do with the fact that she wrote it terrible, because the book's not terrible. It's absolutely not terrible.
Yeah. I would, again, a 4-star review from me says that book is good.
Yeah.
A 3 is a good. A 3 is a good. Sometimes just a meh.
Yeah, I'd probably be in the 3 camp.
Yeah. For me, I thought that book was solid. I think there's a reason that it's kind of undisputed at the top of the list. She caught on to something, even if the fantasy part's not great, even if the romance part is meh. Even if the sex scenes are, for how
they're bad,
for how steamy quote they are, they're not great. We're like Sarah J. Maas and the Crescent City stuff. Those books are not what I would call steamy, but I think they're the smutty bits are much better written. And I don't think of Sarah J. Maas, as much as she has a
bit of a reputation.
Yeah, reputation for that shit. I don't think that's earned. I was like, this kind of seems, especially the fourth or the first Court of Thorns and Roses.
Yeah,
not a lot of smut in that. I don't think I would really call it any. At least what I would think of. Where Fourth Wing's at least we're gonna show the fucking.
Yeah,
and it's okay, whatever. She doesn't spend enough time with she tries to tie magic systems into the fucking too.
She does.
And that's where I'm like, if we gave this to Brandon Sanderson, right? If Brandon Sanderson was like, we're going to show the fucking, And he would never.
No.
Never in a million years.
He's a good Mormon boy.
Yeah.
There's no sex. They barely even kiss.
Yeah, they've never they might hold hands maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if you gave that magic system to like, Sanderson and like, hey, these characters they're gonna be fucking. Or even if you take this back to the non-science fiction Ian Banks. He did a book in the US. It's published under the M Banks, not just the Ian Banks, but in the UK and everywhere else it was just Ian Banks. Where he does like a multi-dimensional travel story, and they use it for fucking.
Oh. Of course they do.
It's
accurate.
It's like, hey, you can like one of the tricks that they learn when they're traveling dimensions is like multi-dimensional orgasms. So it's like hopping from body to body to body to body to body. Yeah, it's fun. It's goofy.
Banks. I didn't know that he should get so much credit, but like seriously, a lot of really like visionary stuff.
Yeah.
In his work.
You had not read a lot of it.
No.
Or any of it.
I had not read any of it.
Yeah, I was happy I was able to change your life. Yeah.
Thank. You know what? It's also not surprising to me that somebody who's super interested in space communism was like, also, multi-reality orgasms.
Sure.
It's like, yes.
Yeah.
That checks out.
If you have an infinite timeline,
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so with Fourth Wing and all that stuff, like, I thought it was better than what you gave it credit for. But again, I would also be the first person to cut that tree straight down.
Yeah.
Like the arguments that I have for it, I'm not very dear to. And even the parts, like I said, the thing that I think that it does really well, despite its subject matter and despite the quality of the story told, is that it is so accessibly written.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. Like it's butter. It's buttery smooth. There's no part of that you're going to read and go, I don't like this.
Yeah.
And if you do, because you're looking in between to find out what's actually going in the, with the butter, right? If you're looking in between those cracks,
this is very
as
much
you had said earlier.
Yeah, this is very much a poisoned by knowledge. Like I've been too many places. I've seen too many things. So like some of that stuff doesn't land for me.
Yep.
And like I do see the friction because it's like, well, and especially I'd literally just reread Scholomance. So it's really hard after that to be like, but.
And that's just a better murder school.
It is. But I think even that said, like, I think we read another murder school book and I think that Fourth Wing's murder school is better.
Oh yeah. That we just did The Will of the Many.
Yeah.
And that murder school, that's you're a Roman senator, Harry.
Yes.
Murder school. And like, oh my God, that I think I still gave that one a 3. There were parts of that book that I liked, but that murder school just fucking sucked.
Not good. Yeah.
It was supposed to be about class dynamics. There was supposed to be something there about hierarchy, and that's what the entire fucking book is about, but
again, this is the problem. Having read Scholomance before both of these books, I'm like, guys.
We can say something with murder school. Like we can say something about the structure of power as a structure of power and make it meaningful and compelling. Where The Will of the Many is trying.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
He's trying to say something about, well, this murder school exists because of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And like, but you got to write a good fucking book around that shit.
Yeah, a lot of that ends up being more theoretical, whereas Scholomance is very grounded in the impacts of all of those systems on the characters. So, like, making it very clear what the like actual lived experience and what the actual stakes of the system are.
Why are all these parents sending their kids to murder school?
Yeah.
Hey, well, there's great reasons actually, and yada yada. Like the whole thing works out. Unlike Fourth Wing, it's like, why are all the parents sending their kids to murder school? Because of a draft. I think that but not all of them.
They're not even drafted. Only the treasonous ones are drafted.
Right. But everyone else is a volunteer. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like, well, why do they volunteer? Well, they have to volunteer something. I was like, oh, fucking okay. She was like, we just got to get him into the murder school.
Yeah. Again, a lot of that stuff, if you don't think about it too hard, whatever. But like the second you start to be like, wait a second, a lot of that House of Cards falls pretty quickly. But overall,
I didn't even realize we hadn't talked about Fourth Wing. So,
yeah.
Well, hey, we were able to turn that into content.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have anything really fucking else to talk about. So Shogun, we've been watching some TV. That's kind of the thing that I think we're both one of the only things I think we're both watching right now.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
Shogun on FX /
Hulu, yes.
/ Disney Plus, which is where I'm watching it. Because Disney Plus has the Hulu stuff.
Oh, that's
and
right.
Disney Plus has it in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. Hulu, I don't know if the Hulu app has support for Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos.
I don't think it does.
I don't think it does.
I don't,
So if you have a Disney Plus subscription tied to the same Hulu account, you can get a higher quality version. It's a whole thing. Someone who cares a lot about HDR, like that's
this is good information to have, in part because this unsurprising to me. The first episode makes it clear, and I assume that this will carry through. Like part of the selling proposition of Shogun is, hey, we're going to show you some very beautiful shots of, the interiors of some of these homes, the locations themselves. You're very, very well like crafted and framed. Like, hey, do you want to just see a very beautiful scene set?
Yeah, it's a very visually distinct show.
Yes.
Even some of that's CGI work that they do for
Sure.
a lot of the larger boat scenes and things like that, where you can tell which scenes are shot on a soundstage with a green screen or a green screen equivalent. But even that stuff looks nice.
Mm-hmm.
It is not visually unimpressive despite the usage of CG, which is a lot. It's a lot. But they do the thing that I want, which is they smear it all over with foam grain.
Yeah.
And which makes it really, really visually distinct. Because it kind of lets some of that CG work blend in versus it being like super clear and nice, right? Yeah, the thing that the show does that, Chris, we've talked about this before. I've seen some anime.
Oh, you?
Yeah, me. Even I have seen anime. How much? Too much. So the one thing that I found, I've been talking to other people who are watching Shogun who don't watch nearly as much anime as I do, which is, just more than any, just like any is,
Sure.
So the entire show, that first episode, for the most part, besides like a couple characters,
yes.
is entirely in Japanese.
Our is his name Blackthorn? Is that our English?
Blackthorn, our English
and
sailor.
a Spaniard who I love.
Yes, the Spaniard's very, very good. He's that swashbuckler.
Yeah.
He's great.
And I love that actor.
Yeah.
He plays a great role in Psych.
Oh,
by the way.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That is who that is.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I was like, I think I've seen him around, but I couldn't think of what.
No, you definitely have.
Yeah, you're right. Psych, one of the cultural touchstones that we have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that everyone should have.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like the way that they do the show, especially that first episode, is everything is in Japanese for the most part, except whenever characters are speaking Portuguese.
Yes.
Not English, Portuguese.
Yes.
And they go through why. But the entire show is subtitled. Now they have dubs. If you're like, I cannot do subtitles, I must do dubbed over audio.
Mm-hmm.
They have that as a special feature on Hulu and Disney Plus and all that. So if you need to hear it with voices because you can't, you need to be able to look away from the screen because that's how your brain works.
Right.
Then you can do it that way. But because it's all subtitled, people are finding that they're more engaged and the words that are being said.
Wild.
It's almost like if you can read the thing and you're forced to look at the thing because you can't comprehend it, that you spend more time thinking about it.
So I will tell you, I am one of those individuals who puts subtitles on for everything. At this point, part of it is probably having gone to a few too many concerts in my day and
In the pre-earplug.
Yeah. And part of it probably is just like the way that sound design works for TV now. I feel like there was recently an article about like, it's not just you, it's hard to hear people's voices. And so like, I want to know what people are saying.
It's all about center channel audio.
Yeah.
So like, especially a lot of people now, a lot of their audio systems at home that have spent any money on their audio system. It's not coming from a TV. It's still coming from a soundbar. Guess what soundbars don't have? They don't have center speakers.
Yeah.
Versus the way that 5.1 surround sound systems are supposed to be designed, which they're supposed to have an entire center speaker, which is where most of the dialogue lives.
Yes, that's the voice parts.
Yeah.
That's where the voices come from.
And soundbars, again, they don't have that. They pushed all the speakers off to the sides.
Yeah.
So you don't get the dialogue.
Yes.
Which fucking sucks.
Yeah.
And everything works that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just you. Yeah.
Yeah, but all that being said, I'm perhaps not I am not the same level of anime sinner as you are, Justice.
Yeah, no.
I do engage though. I have been known
You've
to
seen
partake.
an anime. You just talked about how much you like Shinji.
I did. I did. Literally,
so you cannot hide it. You can't hide your anime from me.
It's true.
I can sniff you out like a fucking rat.
Well, I think one of the things that you do end up running up against when you watch even a little bit of anime is that often you will have dubs, but sometimes those dubs are of sufficiently inferior quality, and that's not always the case. Like I am definitely.
There are some dubs. Some of us are well researched in the field, but who could say? Who could say? But there are some dubs that actually work better.
Yes.
And that's very few and far between. I would watch. There's a couple shows. That I like both.
Yeah.
Where the actual show and the comedy that they're doing in the show works better in Japanese.
Yes.
And then the team that got a hold of it to do the dub had fun with it.
Yeah.
Because it's a comedy. So they had a great time with it and they made it just different stupid.
Yeah.
Instead of the way that the Japanese language track is one type of stupid. And then they went back and did an entirely different thing in English that is great for an entirely different reason.
Yep.
Because you can kind of manipulate, we talked about translation in this earlier, but you can kind of manipulate what it is you're going for and kind of what kind of works for the audience that you want to do.
Yes.
It's entirely different from what the actual show is. The show is very, I'll find the name of the show. But it's like very much a romance and it's very dry and it's comedy from a narrator perspective. And then for the English dub, they got an entirely different narrator doing an entirely different thing who is not dry.
You've mentioned this before, where like they will specifically like make jokes in English that are not things that happened in the Japanese dub, but like capture the spirit of what the Japanese was attempting to get.
Yeah,
which is great. I love that kind of work, and I think all of that does still get us back to the point that when you are reading something on a screen, like that is reinforcing the things that are being said. And if anything, hearing the inflection that someone is putting on the Japanese that's being said and like being able to like recognize the body language and like the tone, you're getting information from that, but being forced to understand that by reading words on a screen you've got to be more engaged than you have to be in a show that's English that you can just kind of zone out on.
Yeah, the show that I was talking about was Kaguya-sama Love is War, which is great fucking romance comedy. But the thing that Shogun does really well, that really works for me, is as someone who is fucking poisoned with this shit, is that the English characters have to navigate like the way that titles work in Japanese. And, in that first episode, he's dealing with the woman who also speaks Portuguese, and he keeps calling her name. She's like, no, you need to call me Mrs. this thing. Because I can't remember what any of the characters' names are.
I do love how the Spaniard, like when he first meets Blackthorn, he's like, you idiot, kneel and say this.
Yep.
Because you've just insulted them. Because you're a big dummy.
Yeah, because you don't know this. Yeah, you don't know what the fuck you're doing. Yeah. Just say this. The culture is different.
Yeah,
you need to understand.
The entire time Blackthorn was like, "Well, these savages," and he's like, "Buddy,
no,
you have no idea what's going on here."
But yeah, like they go through like how titles work and whatever, and some of that stuff we just don't have like cultural familiarity with approaching everyone with specific terms, right?
Well, like using it's the kind of thing where in many languages you have like a impersonal you and a personal you, and if you say the personal you to somebody that you don't know, that is incredibly offensive. And like with Japanese. There are specific titles that you can use if you have a certain level of familiarity and if you are of a certain caste.
Right.
So it's like, well, Blackthorn doesn't know any of that
he
because
doesn't
the
know any of that
English,
shit.
that's not. They do their weird hierarchy stuff in a different way.
Yeah. They don't have to add and append things to specific people's names.
Yes.
Unless they're royalty. But so they build these nice specific cultural touchstones that I think a lot of people who don't experience that have not been anime fucking poison pilled like I have. But the thing that I think people are figuring out, and this is what happens with me. So like one of my favorite things to do is to eat food and watch TV. That is how I watch most of my TV, is while I eat, because otherwise I'm not really watching TV.
Sure.
I have stopped to do something, so I will stop and I will watch TV while I eat. When you're watching shit that's subtitled, you kind of can't do that because if you don't look at the screen, you can't figure out what the fuck people are saying.
Yeah.
So whenever you look down to eat, so I don't watch anime very often when I eat. So I have to like dedicate time to watching anime, which is a sin. So you have to dedicate time to a show, right? You kind of can't turn away from it. You can't look at your phone. You have to watch the screen to figure out what the fuck people are saying. So take Game of Thrones and turn that up to 11, right? Of not only do you not know what some of these things are that they're talking about, but if you look away, you literally don't know what the fuck they said.
Right.
And that's, for a lot of people, very different. Because it makes that not just appointment viewing, but you have to be fully engaged in it. You kind of can't just let your ears do the thing and look away.
Right.
So, which means that whenever you watch the show, they have to make those visuals compelling also. Because you're stuck looking at it. You know, you can't just kind of turn away and whatever. So that's part of that. And I think it works really, really, really well for what they're specifically doing with that show. And there's a lot of stuff that's been, that era of Japan's kind of been picking up in multiple different media. So there's Shogun, there's...
I just watched Blue Eye Samurai.
And that's on Netflix?
That's on Netflix, yes. Yeah. Maya Erskine, we'll get into another thing that she's in, but like I didn't know that she voiced the main character of that show, and then I found out. I was like, of course,
yeah,
of course. So she's very good. It's Netflix made a good one. They did a good job.
I forget, is that a TV show or is that an anime?
It's anime inspired. So
like a Castlevania
ish. So the art is not exactly anime, but it is animated.
Okay.
It's gorgeous. Like again, very similar situation where you are getting, although it's in English, so different on that end, but you are getting like a bunch of really beautifully drawn shots that in and of themselves are incredibly engaging. But it deals with feudal Japan. It deals with the period in which white folks are just showing up in Japan and causing some problems.
That's what white people do.
Turns
That's
out
what we do.
Real good at it. Yeah. It's one of those where the main character is looking for, well, now 3 white people because she's got some business to attend to with them.
Yeah.
And you technically aren't even supposed to exist in Japan. So there's a very, very like important white character who technically no one is allowed to know is in Japan because white people technically aren't allowed to be in Japan. But like, he sells guns. And hey, turns out guns versus swords.
Yeah,
a little bit of a power
really
differential.
Well. Yeah, guns work really well.
Which Shogun deals with this. In the very first episode, it's very clear that same power dynamic is an important part of what the plot elements of the story are driving towards.
Yeah. It's a cool show. I like it. I'm an episode behind. I think you've watched the first one.
Yeah.
So I like what it's doing. I want to keep watching that. I don't do a lot of like the prestige appointment television stuff. I don't, but this is just enough up my alley, and other people I know are watching it who I didn't think would watch stuff like this. That I'm like, I'll keep up on this. We can watch this. So.
What I also appreciate that like Hulu is the same group that did Prey. And I appreciate that they are providing content that they're not just defaulting to English. They're saying, hey, we're going to get, and again, visually stunning. It's like, we're going to give you this thing and we're going to trust that like you can figure this out.
And it's not like it's what Netflix does, which is they just grab content from everyone everywhere.
Yeah.
This is very like specifically designed, well thought out shows that are usually, and supposed to be for English speaking audiences.
Yeah.
Unlike, Netflix will grab a bunch of K-dramas and various other shows or whatever, but these are shows designed to be consumed by an English speaking audience that are a diverse perspective on that,
Yeah.
So I think that's very cool.
Yeah. Agreed.
Lastly, you and I have both been playing a fuck ton of video games, which I think has been part of the problem.
Well, I've very specifically been spending a lot of time with one video game.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I will say before we get into that stuff, I've been enjoying. I recommended this to you. I told you, and I believe I quote, I think you should play the new Prince of Persia.
Yes, you did
I think
say
you
that.
would like it.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Yeah.
I stand by that. Even now, I can tell you this. It's fucking really good.
I am a pretty big Metroidvania person anyway. I think it's very difficult to say this is my favorite game because favorites are tricky, but Hollow Knight is easily in my top 5.
So I did not play Hollow Knight, and I didn't understand the scope that a lot of these Metroidvanias are now doing. Because the last Metroidvania that I've played is Symphony of the Night again.
Sure.
That's
sure.
about the scale that I can do. Is Symphony of the Night like over like 2 weeks? And that's good for me. So this is another one that's pretty big. It feels like I've been playing this for a while, and it has not yet stopped getting bigger. And that's, as someone with a finite amount of free time, that is driving fear into my heart. But I've been really enjoying it. They came out, they said they're going to do some more story-based DLC. The story there is actually fun. You are not playing as the Prince of Persia, as far as you know. You're playing as just a guy.
Okay.
Who has to try to save the Prince of Persia. And I was like, these boys should kiss, because that's where as soon as I saw the two characters interact, I went, these guys should kiss. Just right away. It's like that's how this should
You're
go.
probably not wrong.
Yeah, this is how this should go. But it's really, it runs really well on the Switch if you would play it there. I have it on PS5 and it does 120 frames per second at 4K with VRR support. So God. Every single frame is delivered directly to your eyeballs. It's a good looking video game, regardless of where you play it. And I've been really, really liking it. And then I've put that on hold to play a bunch of other shit. But
it's interesting because I think you may have convinced me to do that next, versus the next thing I had on my agenda was the first Dragon's Dogma game, because second one is...
Yeah, the second one's around the corner.
Yeah.
I play Prince of Persia.
I feel like Dragon's Dogma is going to take a long time.
Based on where you're at and what you're doing.
Yeah.
Play Prince of Persia.
Yeah, that sounds like it's probably...
Yeah, the first Dragon's Dogma has some challenging texture in it that I am more interested to see how they're going to do it in a sequel than I am revisiting it in 2024. So I think everyone should play it because I think it's good. And also, like, there's a Steam sale going on right now and it's $3, $4, $5. It's always $5 if you look right.
Right.
But with there being a new one around the corner, and if that's the next thing you're going to play, is if you're trying to clear your calendar for Dragon's Dogma 2, having the context of Dragon's Dogma 1 of like what these systems are and what they mean from a story perspective and how all these things are tied together is narratively really satisfying because it's mostly about multi-dimensional mindless travelers
Great.
that are your best friends. Like the pawn system is like your primary way to interact with the world, which is dimensional traveling beings that are hollow shells of humans.
Fascinating.
And they just go accumulate knowledge by also traveling with your friends. So like your friends list, people can hire your pawn for free. Otherwise you have to spend currency on it. And then they take your pawn out, which is this other character. You create your character.
Yes.
And then you immediately have to create your best friend.
Yeah.
And then you should spend more time creating your best friend because that's how you're going to interact with the rest of the actual world.
Fascinating.
Because other people can hire your pawn.
Yes.
So knowing what Dragon's Dogma did with the pawn system is a fun context to have for Dragon's Dogma 2.
Yes.
But they could do something totally different from the plot. But I think that's good information to have.
Yeah.
I don't think it's required. So, or at least it may not be.
Okay.
Because there's an entire separate thing we didn't get in English, which is Dragon's Dogma Online, which might have done more with that story. I don't know. So there's only so much they can do with, and also Dragon's Dogma was 2012. Dark Arisen might have been 2014.
That
so
sounds
we're like
right.
10 years out. So I can't imagine they're like, haha, you know what we'll do is we'll pin this back to a story that no one's going to fucking remember from 10 to 12 years ago.
And it's interesting that you say that about this game because all of that conversation applies really nicely to the game that I've been playing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have primarily been playing Alan Wake 2, which the first Alan Wake came out in 2013. It is a game that I think it's difficult to suggest someone play the first game because it is not a fun game to play feel-wise, but also
This is me nodding my head vehemently.
yeah, there's some good context that you get from that first game that certainly enriches the experience of the second game, but Remedy, part of, I think, the goal for them in creating the second game was, well, you should play the first game, but we don't necessarily want to make that mandatory. So I think you could still get things out of Alan Wake 2 without having played Alan Wake 1. You will have way, way more context with Alan Wake 1, but also you'll have some context if you've played Control, which is a significantly better game.
Yeah.
By my God, so much better.
A large margin.
Yes. Yes.
I've gone back. If you have PlayStation Plus, they gave you Alan Wake, the remaster, for free. So I went back to Alan Wake 1.
Yes.
I have my Steam Deck OLED, which has HDR support for streaming the PS5 to my Steam Deck.
Nice.
Which is fucking awesome. So I was playing Alan Wake 1, the remaster.
Uh-huh.
God, that game fucking kind of sucks. It's not great to play.
No.
It's just not a good feeling game. So if that's a thing to do before Alan Wake 2, just put it on easy and just fucking steamroll through it.
That I think we talked about this, and I was like, hey,
if you have to, if you're like, this is, I can't watch, or I can't read The Lord of the Rings without having read The Hobbit.
Yes.
Which you can read The Lord of the Rings without having read The Hobbit.
Yeah.
You can watch the movies without having read The Hobbit.
Oh yeah.
You might miss a couple things.
Yeah.
But they'll get you there.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I think because the frustrating thing about Alan Wake 1, and unfortunately this is also, it's less frustrating but still frustrating about Alan Wake 2, is that the combat is doing something thematically interesting, but it doesn't feel good to do. Like having to use a flashlight to burn away darkness before you can do stuff with enemies is an interesting, like, thematically, like,
compelling choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like it
adds tension.
It's narratively
you have to use a separate, like, the thing in Alan Wake 1 was you had to aim down sights with the flashlight.
Yes.
And the flashlight was a different secondary ammo type, which
Yes.
had branded Duracell batteries.
Yes.
So you had to actually collect Duracell batteries to replace the batteries in the flashlight. But the compelling thing there was you had the texture of 2 different types of ammo.
Yes.
Because you had to get the reticle on them with the regular gun ammo, but you had to use the flashlight, and that allowed for just some other resource management, which is how they tried to add more texture. The thing is, the enemy types and the way that they do that, so you have to keep the reticle on them, not just successfully to pull the trigger, but successfully for an extended period of time. Was not fun.
Yeah, and sometimes it stuns them, so you get like the chance to actually like take your time, but sometimes it doesn't. And I had some very frustrating like runs where it's just like, I just need this to be done. I just don't want to do this part of the game anymore. And you just won't let me get past this part of the game.
Yeah.
Because I have to aim the flashlight at exactly the right moment, and I only have
and then the flashlight has a burst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, part of what makes Alan Wake 1 interesting is some of the themes and touchstones that they're dealing with. We already talked about Stephen King, and that is very clearly like one of the things that they are leaning on. You have this pulp author who writes these
mystery genre.
Yeah, hard-boiled detective.
Yeah.
Alex Casey.
Yep.
Actually supposed to be Max Payne, but
yeah.
They couldn't do that.
They couldn't do that because Rockstar owns Max Payne.
Yeah. And then decided to sue them over using an R? Did you see that?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It's a whole thing. Yep.
Yeah. But so like a lot of that stuff is interesting. Like the Twin Peaks is another touchstone. They literally have owls in this.
I think they have a log lady.
But with a light instead of a log.
Yeah, with a light.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yes. So it's playing a lot with those conventions, and like all that stuff, I am a sucker for that. That works really well for me. But then you have to go fight people.
Yeah.
And that stuff sucks.
What did you think of Deadly Premonition?
I didn't play it.
As a Twin Peaks fan, I feel like you should go back and play some Deadly Premonition.
Okay.
It is a Japanese take on Twin Peaks.
Okay.
It is not good. It is not a good. It is not a good video game at all in the slightest. But it is a very Japanese take on Twin Peaks.
Okay. God, I really love Twin Peaks.
Yeah. The Deadly Premonition is literally. I don't remember if it's Grasshopper. It's done by. Let me tell you. I'll tell you while you get to the next thing. But yeah, you should play Deadly Premonition.
So, as frustrating as the first Alan Wake is, I think the second Alan Wake is less frustrating when it comes to the combat, but it still falls into that trap in a bunch of places. So, I don't want to give too much away, but what I will say is, if you really want to understand everything that's going on in the game, you end up having to play it through twice.
Okay.
The first time I played through on normal difficulty. There were a bunch of sections that, like, it became really, really frustrating, and I did not have a good time doing combat because of that. Mm-hmm. And one section at the end that I was just like, no, I'm turning this down to easy for this specific thing because this is not what I'm here for this game. Mm-hmm. For the second playthrough, I was like, easy. We're not going to do this again. There's no reason to do this again because the combat isn't a compelling enough source of tension to drive home the points that the narrative is making for it to make sense to do that twice. And there's an argument that it maybe doesn't even make sense to do it once. I think some of that tension is good, but some of it is just frustrating for no good reason.
When you have games like Nier Automata that go back and make that second playthrough mechanically compelling. Yeah. Because they make it an entirely different mechanic for a lot of combat. Yeah. They don't do that.
Yeah. Well, and part of what's frustrating and interesting is that they make that I'm fairly certain they've made that choice for narrative reasons that I think make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But also now you've made this narrative decision, and I, as the player, have to live with that for another 10 hours. Yeah. Which, okay. Yeah. Great.
Deadly Premonition, by the way, to jump back to that, is a sweary game. So if you are familiar with the director, Swery. It's Swery's take on Twin Peaks.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's on Switch. I don't know where you should play it, but do some homework.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think it's definitely fucking weird.
Now, I do have to say, because I've just spent a lot of time saying like frustrating things about Alan Wake.
Yeah.
It is very important for me to say, specifically Alan Wake 2, man, there's so much good stuff there, though.
Yeah.
And it is all the narrative stuff. And they do some really, really fascinating and compelling things with giving you the narrative. And it's Remedy doing like the most Remedy.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with like how Max Payne and how Control and how these other games, what was the one that they did that had an actual TV show in it from Remedy? It was like an Xbox exclusive.
Was it? I think Quantum Break.
Yeah. Yeah. Quantum Break.
Yeah.
And like they get fucking weird with shit. And what I mean is like they get actual actors to do stuff.
They have
as
FMV
actors.
videos that play in spaces and
yeah. And it sounds like they have gone, based on the awards that I have seen for that the game has received, they have gone above and beyond what they have done in the past.
Justice, there is a great musical number.
I've heard.
Yes, and there is a full entire art house film in the game.
I believe it.
Full thing, and not just a good art house film. Yeah, it's and there is some stuff that they're doing with the gameplay that is also interesting. There is some stuff that they play around with how one of the characters deals with like creating. One of the characters is an FBI agent, and like there's some stuff around how she makes deductions and like pulls together pieces of evidence that is interesting, and they do fun stuff with, and like ends up being a pretty important plot point for reasons. And then Alan does stuff around actual narrative. Like he's being a writer, and like they actually make the writing a mechanic in a really fascinating way in the game. And a lot of that stuff is super interesting. And it's like, I just wish that I didn't have to unload 10 shotgun shells into this weird thing.
Shadow monster ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the middle of like, it's not for no good reason. Like, why are we doing this? So
yeah, there's plenty of other games that I think deal with the horror action or like kind of the horror adjacent action. I mean, they just remastered Resident Evil 4, which is the thing that really changed how like horror games interact. Like you as a player interact with horror, right? And really turned it into an action component, a little bit more modern Dawn of the Dead than Dawn of the Dead, right? You're shooting at things. There's compelling actions with the combat versus Resident Evil 2, is the shooting part. If you're shooting a gun, you're in danger.
Yeah.
Right. Where Resident Evil 4, if you're usually shooting a gun, and that's your way to generate safety. So like there's some mechanics there that video games have adapted to and evolved with over time. And that Alan Wake is in that lens.
Yeah, it's
like
in dialogue with those games, but it hasn't necessarily
it's not as successful.
Taken those lessons and applied them.
Yeah, because it wants you to feel danger, and it's like I said, the texture there is the light mechanic and how much you can use the flashlight, and the batteries die and whatever. It's just less effective than like some of those other ones that are more fun.
Well, and I will say part of what the game does, which a lot of the Resident Evil, I have not personally played a ton of Resident Evil. I've watched it because those games have never really. I don't like playing that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
like,
I don't like it
feel wise.
No, I don't like it either.
Usually,
Yeah.
and like Alan Wake is leaning on a lot of that stuff. But like part of what you end up having is like long stretches where you are not in combat, which is good because the combat is not good. But like it kind of feels like what I've watched people play Resident Evil, like what that looks like, where it's like, all right, we're doing investigation, we're searching stuff. And then suddenly you are spending like 20 minutes in a combat and it seems frustrating.
And the puzzle's not fun. I think one of the things that they really did well in Control, and I never finished Control, but the thing that they did really well there is the combat puzzle is fun.
Yes.
That is what that game, it does a lot of things really, really, really well. And I would probably say if you're going to play one of these things, play Control.
I would tend to agree.
Yeah.
I think if you're not already bought into Alan Wake and you are not, like, if you love Twin Peaks, if you love Stephen King, if you love the touchstones, then yes, play Alan Wake. If you don't, but you want to play a good Remedy game, play Control. That's the one to play.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they did, like, the combat puzzle there is fun. And I think that's the thing with Alan Wake, with what they've done with that character with the first game. They tried to make Alan Wake's American Nightmare, which was that other more combat focused, like arcadey thing, which was also not great.
Yeah, it was very silly.
The combat's not good
Yeah.
in Alan Wake to really get you there.
Yeah.
But Control, the puzzles are fun.
Yeah.
The combat puzzle, the mechanics of clearing the room out is a good time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not surprised that they couldn't really solve that in Alan Wake 2, but at least the other parts of it are much better than just running through the long hallways.
Oh yeah, it the stuff that lands so well. And like even some of there's a specific instance where you are put in a situation, like I think I mentioned this to you a bit ago, like it's a spooky game. Like Alan Wake 1 is kind of eerie, but it's not really scary.
Spooky.
Yeah, it's not spooky. This is a spooky game. And there's a point in the game where the game does what a good spooky game does, where it's like, okay, we've set up a scenario where you are expecting now that you're going to go into this place and something is going to jump out at you. You are going to get attacked by a thing here, and you go through the entire place and nothing happens. And the entire time I was down there, I was like, I hate this. I'm having a bad time. I don't like being here. I don't like this. The vibes here are rancid. This is not a good time. And then you leave and you're like, wait.
Oh, that was it?
That's like all I got was like a creepy laugh.
Right.
That was it.
Yeah. Not like a Resident Evil where it's like, hey, we're gonna fucking scare the shit out of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not that. Excellent. Good.
Well, I would say if you do end up playing Alan Wake 2, I think there is...
I would do the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I would do Alan Wake 1.
Yeah.
I would finally go back and finish Control. All those are on the PS5. They all look... The remaster of Alan Wake 1 is fine. I also have the old version on my Steam Deck because I also got that for...
They're mostly the same.
Just
one gets to use the licensed music.
Yep. That's it.
Yeah.
So, I think if I make time, I'm just going to make time for all of it.
I think that's a good idea because I do think a lot of the stuff that lands really well lands even better if you have that context.
Yeah.
Also, I think there is more that we can talk about if you have played through the entire game because I don't want to spoil things.
Yeah.
I know you're not like necessarily super spoiler sensitive, but like I would prefer that you get a chance to experience like
I'm actually anti spoilers. I think spoiler culture as a whole has ruined media. I said this in book club the other day. We were reading Elric, and Elric starts out with every chapter going, the chapter that Elric gets betrayed in.
Yeah.
And then you move on because that makes books better. Is knowing actually what's going to happen is actually good and not bad. And science has proven that. That our brains actually respond to more pleasure because we see a thing is going to happen and then we get that thing.
I'm definitely I'm one of those like I think a little bit of both.
There is a balance, and which is why I'm not like tell me everything. But there's a balance. No good.
But yeah, I think there's some more interesting conversations we can have about like death of the author and art that you can have after getting through some of that content. So
got it. Cool.
Yeah. Also, Alan Wake fucking sucks. I just need
as a
need
person,
for you to know that the human being of Alan Wake
he's shitty and bad.
He is not good.
So like the one thing that I think came off as confusing for a lot of people at the time that Alan Wake 1 came out is I don't know if that was generally well received and that message understood.
Yeah.
And I can't remember where all Alan Wake 1 ends with Alan Wake. But I know the Max Payne games, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also Remedy.
Yes.
Their whole thing was Max Payne is shitty. Like he had a shitty tragic past, but also that does not a good man does that make.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You know, you're popping painkillers and, you know, doing drugs and, you know, like being a crooked fucking cop to solve all your problems and whatever. And they knew how to make that character because it's also a pretty common archetype.
Yeah.
Alan Wake is not a common archetype for mass media.
Yes.
There's some media you can point to some things that's like, hey, that's referencing this, and this, but the fucking dumb author who is a bad person on the inside is not a common archetype.
Yeah.
For mass audiences to consume. So yeah, there's some of that messaging that I could definitely see would get missed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another thing that some of the things that are crappy about Alan Wake are because Alan Wake is supposed to be crappy.
Yeah.
And it's tough because you're like, okay, I can give you some leeway because of that, but I don't know that you get all the And I think Alan Wake 1, it's harder to do that because it's not as clear what the whole game is.
Right.
I think it's much easier. So one of the things that changes in Alan Wake 2 is you've got two POV characters, Saga, your FBI agent, and Alan. And having the two of them makes it easier to see because I tell you what, Saga is great.
Yeah.
Saga is a delight.
Yeah.
And like there is literally a point that you do a thing with Saga where you're like, man, Alan.
Oh, I think you're bad.
Yeah, you couldn't do this, and here's Saga, just like a champ, just flying through it with just aplomb and grace.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll definitely put it back on the backlog. It's not that it wasn't there, but I'll move it around. I have been playing outside of Prince of Persia. I've been playing Labyrinth of Galleria, which is a dungeon crawler. I have not played a dungeon crawler for a good time. Labyrinth of Yomi, I think, was the last one that I was playing very seriously. So it is like a old school wizardry style, tile by tile dungeon crawler. And I fucking love mechanics. Like I love video game mechanics, and just the mechanics are good. The mechanics are real good. So the game that came out and still like the Labyrinth by this developer, this is done by what is it? NIS. They're the same people that do the Disgaea series.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So they have like a very specific anime art style. And they did another Labyrinth game, Labyrinth of something. There's a Steam sale going on right now. You can get that first game for $15. I don't know if it's as good. I've heard good things about both of them. I have them both on Switch. But if you want them on Steam, they're on sale right now. And Labyrinth of Galleria is really fun. It is good. You're like, your party is just like dolls, so you have to repair the dolls and whatever, and it's very fun. And I like all the fiddly bits and knobs. They produce a large amount of knobs to fiddle with, and that's kind of like the combat for turn-based RPG style combat. There's a lot of fun things to do mechanically that aren't exactly like a Persona. So I'm not yet at like actively buffing and debuffing multiple turns and like forever, but we're getting to a point where I'm going to be starting to actively buff and debuff for forever.
Yeah.
So it's good. And then I kind of set that aside to play Prince of Persia. And then Dragon's Dogma 2 is out soon, but I've been playing the latest and greatest in the RPG news. That's not Final Fantasy Rebirth 2 or Final Fantasy 7 R2, which is Rebirth, not remake.
Yes. Yes.
I've been playing Unicorn Overlord.
Yes.
Which is just as good of a name, well, a less good name than Ogre Battle, which is kind of what this is a new version of. So it is a strategy role-playing game, not a tactics base. So if you're familiar with like Final Fantasy Tactics or Tactics Ogre, which is in the same series as Ogre Battle.
Yeah.
Ogre Battle started more as like a real-time strategy. You would move large units on a map in real time.
Yes.
And then those units would collide with other units. Then they would auto battle. So you would have no input on who got to do what. And then that output would then resolve the battle, and then you would move on, and it was about like finishing that map with whatever. So Atlas and who is the publisher who published Ogre Battle 64 whenever
Oh.
it came to the US. So they have a history with Ogre Battle. Vanillaware has been working on this game for 10 years. Vanillaware is the same people who made 13 Sentinels, Odin Sphere, the other one, the fairy tale one that I like a lot. I can't think of the name of it. Or no, Dragon's Crown. Odin Sphere is the fairy tale one. Dragon's Crown is their take on the Dungeons and Dragons arcade game.
Okay.
So what they did was they went back and spent 10 years making a new Ogre Battle. And it's good. They made a new Ogre Battle and they made it very approachable. Like it's been great. I'm like 30 hours in.
Okay.
I've been playing it a lot.
Can't be bad.
Yeah, it can't be bad. It's good. The actual mechanics of playing the game are fun. The characters suck. I also really like a Fire Emblem, and I think Three Houses is still my favorite Fire Emblem, even though I think Engage is a better Fire Emblem from a gameplay perspective. But I like the characters in Three Houses a lot. This is more on the Engage side, where the characters are kind of just just like nonsense faces.
Sure.
They're just named faces and names.
Sure.
Where then you get generic mercenary units that are also very good. That you can even control their leveling a bit more. So like they expose more knobs for the fake people than the real people. So it's like
fascinating.
yeah, it's not building a good reason to continue to use some of the named characters.
Sure.
Because you can kind of mess with some of the other ones. But it's been good. I've been really enjoying that. I also bought that on Switch. So like this summer we're doing a large trip to Ireland. So I'm trying to decide, do I take my Steam Deck on that trip, or am I going to be done with enough stuff, and I take the Switch?
Could be the
thing. Everything that I've been buying lately has been on the Switch.
So it seems like that's
going to be
the direction.
Yeah, unless I clear all that stuff out and I go back and finally finish Disco Elysium or something. So
sure.
But it's been definitely that way. Well, shit. I think we're out of green beer. At least I am.
Yeah, close. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. Well, so for the month of March, we were going to go back to some of the labor stuff. We were going to do women's history. So there's that women's labor book that I still want to read.
Yeah.
We're going to do some stuff like that. And then I don't think we'll get another episode in this month. I think we'll be back in April. So
yeah, there's quite a bit going on. So
Yeah.
I think it'll be.
So we might do Dune and Dune 2.
Mm-hmm.
And get that out of the way, kind of, because both of us have not seen Dune 2 yet, and I think there's enough there. And then we'll probably do. There's some stuff that was at the Oscars that I still have not seen. I still have not seen.
I haven't seen most of the Oscar stuff,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
And I mean, we talked a little bit about Erasure, the book that American Fiction is based off of. There's a conversation to be had there.
Oh, right. I forgot. We didn't even talk about this yet. That you kind of you're nearly a 180 on American Fiction.
Yeah. It's fascinating to have had the experience that I have gotten to have with
An absolute roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah. But I think there's plenty worth talking about there, and I think that actually would dovetail nicely into conversations about labor.
Yeah.
Because some of the stuff that I think some of the stuff that the movie doesn't handle well is explicitly about labor and class.
Yep.
So we should revisit that in light of the book being dramatically different than the movie.
So, sure.
Yeah.
Well, that'll do it here at Cultural Fugazi. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
I'm gonna make sure the waves move.
Are they making the sounds?
Yeah, like
Capturing the sounds?
like two tides at night.
Oh, look at that.
That's not how tides work. Come on, idiot.
No, it's not.
It's not.
It's
I
definitely.
mean, why does it matter if it's night? What did I even
Well,
mean?
because the moon is out
Because
then, and the moon
is stronger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's
The moon gathers
100% how
strength at night.
Yes. It banishes the sun.
Yeah.
It's like, this is my time.
Yeah. like a werewolf. That's why werewolves are werewolves, because the moon's strong.
Yes. Oh.